Alright, so we got the applesauce done. If you missed that video, be sure to check it out. Today it is time to can the tomatoes. I'm going to do mostly tomato juice. I think I'm going to do some just crushed tomatoes for soup, but mostly juice because I have some in the pantry, but not a whole lot, and we do a lot of soups in the winter, and it's good to have just plain, organically grown tomato juice in the pantry for things like that. So the first thing we're going to do is get these frozen tomatoes in the pots. I just have my 2 pressure canner pots. I use these all the time. I used these for apples the other day when I did them. If you watched that video, you saw them. This is the larger one that does 2 layers of pints, and this is just the regular one that just does 1 layer of both pints and quarts. But I don't use them as to pressure can as much as I do to cook big things in, or sometimes I have water bath in them, but I do have a water bath canner for that I use most of the time. But these are just good to have. I have an old one that was my grandmother's, and I use it too. I use it for chilies and things. It's a big, thick bottom pot. It really comes in handy. So the reason I freeze all these, one, I don't have large batches of tomatoes sometimes. So this way I can freeze them, and as I get enough, then I can can. I also really don't like to can things like this in the summer because it's hot outside and it makes the house hot. I would just rather do this in the fall, especially like today. It's gloomy outside. It's cool outside. I don't have many things to do out in the garden, but I can do this inside and get this in the pantry. I do this much the same way as I do apples to make applesauce. I cut all the apples up, I leave the skin on, leave the core on, especially if they're organic apples. And I just cut them all up, put them in the pots, get them nice and soft, and I run them through the strainer, and then I can them. So the applesauce, and that's what I did the other day. If you missed that, be sure to check that video out. You can see how I did that. These are almost the exact same way. I freeze these because, again, I don't want to can these in the summer. It's just my preference. I'd rather just do them all in the fall. Do a great big bulk. I have to get the strainer out. I cleaned it all up from apples, so I still have it out, but if anybody has a food strainer, you know, it's kind of a pain to clean, and so you don't want to get it out like every single week. I prefer not to, or like multiple times in a week. So I just like to do it all at one time. I have this food strainer out, you know, maybe 2-3 times a year. I use it for applesauce, I use it for my tomatoes, and I will use it when I make blackberry jam because I don't like the seeds. So I do have a berry screen that takes the seeds out. That is about the only time I use it, unless I'm making salsa and I'm using the bigger salsa guard. This year I used the food processor to make it. I may use the juice guard, do my juice, but then I may save a bag or 2 and use the bigger guard that I could maybe use, like maybe pieces of the tomato would come through. I would get crushed tomatoes, or I may just heat them up separately and I may puree them in the food processor and call that crushed tomatoes for soups. So we're going to get started. I have about 48 pounds, 6 ounces. I wanted to know exactly how many tomatoes I was going to can this year. I got more tomatoes than this, but we did eat some of them. I ate some of them in salads and stuff like that. So we're just going to put these in the pots, and then we're going to get this heated up and get them thawed out. Now, as you can see, I had a lot of like cherry and grape tomatoes, and some of the Abe Lincoln or some of the heirloom tomatoes are on the smaller side, which works really well for this because they fit in this pot. They're like huge marbles, and they fit in here perfectly. They don't take up a lot. There's not a lot of airspace and stuff like that, so that works out really good. So we'll get that going. And I'm going to go ahead and pull aside a couple of bags so that I remember to make the crushed tomatoes of those. So I'm going to leave those out and put those in a different pot and heat those up later. As you can see, these don't come out. They are frozen in there individually. They come out much faster. Those whole little tomatoes are fantastic. I usually just split this bag and then it peels right off. As you can see, this one did a lot better because they're all frozen individually. they weren't sticking together. I actually filled some of those bags a little bit at a time and froze them and just added fresh tomatoes and froze on top of those. These are cut up so they are sticking together. This will need to cook down and eventually we'll get all down in the pot. And once these are boiling and I can stir them really good and they're nice and hot, I'll get my food strainer together and get my setup just like I had for the applesauce, and I will strain these into juice and get those canned. And then it works out perfectly because I don't actually have room for another one, maybe in here, but I'm gonna do those other 2 bags for the crushed tomatoes here in a little bit. I'll probably go ahead and put them in my other pot so that when one of these is done, I can just swap it out. All right, got the other 2 bags of tomatoes in the other pot, ready to do crushed tomatoes with those after these heat up and get ready to go. So I'm gonna let these heat and I'm gonna go do some other things like eat lunch and edit a video. Alright, we're going to see how well I can multitask. I have supper going on the stove and we'll try to get these tomatoes done this evening. So we'll see. So this is the food strainer. I'm going to show you how it goes together real quick. Just clamps onto, screws onto a table with like a screw clamp. I don't know what that's called. I have this little rubber piece of like the stuff you put in cabinets to keep dishes from sliding around. I have it folded over because it does help it not move on wood. So the handle is on it. I usually leave the handle on it unless it's really messy and then I clean that off. And then the auger goes on, and then you get the screen. This is the medium screen that I use for applesauce and tomatoes. There is a smaller screen, a berry screen that I use for blackberry jam. And then there is a bigger screen you can use for salsa and things. But whatever screen you use, make sure it has this rubber washer in here. Otherwise you will make a really big mess. So that goes on there, and this just tightens up with these wing nuts. You just want to make sure it gets tight enough to where the juice is not going to come out around. That's what that rubber seal is for. Alright, then we have the tray. And the newer models actually have a plastic piece that comes up over this to keep the spray out. This one is old. It was my grandma's. So I don't have that piece. And it looks like I'm actually going to have to move this a little bit. Now ideally you want this on like your counter or your table that doesn't really move a whole lot. But that has changed here right now. So I have the hopper. I have this that came with another one that just pushes it down in there. I think the new ones come with this. So this is the setup. We're going to get this ran through and probably make another mess on the floor. Alright, put the apron back on because I am messy. So we're basically going to do the same thing we did with the apples. We're just going to put the tomatoes through this. They cook down into one pot. I figured they might fit. I still have the other pot with the ones that I am going to make some like crushed tomatoes with and can those. But this is just going to be juice and everything that comes out the end. I do need a bowl for that. I will just give to the chickens. They will enjoy that treat. So the same thing. It's just going to come through. You're going to get juice out here and a little bit of pulp. And then the skins, seeds, and stuff like that will just come out the end. Now if you wanted the seeds in it for some reason, you could probably just use the bigger screen and it would come through, the seeds would come through that screen. Noticed there is much more juice coming out of these than there was the applesauce. While you do get juice from the applesauce, you get a lot more juice from the tomatoes because they are made up of more water than the apples are. The apples have more flesh, more fruit on the inside where the tomatoes don't have as much. There's much less pulp. I'm not really having to scrape it like I did the applesauce, which is kind of nice. I will have to scrape off the very end, but probably not before that. I find that if I scrape off too early, the juice really splatters a lot more and gets all over everything. So I just kind of let it hang out on there because it doesn't build up quite as much as what the applesauce did. Now what I'm hoping for is to get all this in that smaller pot. I'm not so sure that is going to happen. Alright, it almost fit, but not quite. I'm about to overflow that pot. So I'm going to take some out, put it in the bigger pot, and then finish it here and dump it all back in to the big pot. Alright, so this is the only time we have to scrape this off. It's kind of like tomato paste on here. All that off. Alright, so that's done. Now it is my favorite, not my favorite part, and it's cleanup. Basically take it apart, the way we put it together. As you can see, there's not much left on there, which is good. Alright, we just clean it all up. So back after dinner and prayer meeting tonight, so we are back. I'm going to finish the tomato juice. I'm going to do things a little bit differently, but I have the tomato juice here, we've got the jars. I'm estimating again, hopefully I don't really overestimate and not use very many of these. I've got my sugar and my salt that I've always put in my tomato juice. That is what my grandmother did, so that is what I do. I'm going to be adding tomato juice this year. That's what the ball canning recipe recommends, so we're going to add that and let's see how that does. Got my lid back here getting ready to go. The water bath canner is heating up, so we're going to get this started so we can get this done and I can maybe get done in a halfway decent hour. So I just so happen to have this Santa Cruz organic lemon juice, and I'm going to use this, and I'll just get the kids some more. I've been buying this for them to make lemonade. So I have never, like I said, I've never actually put lemon juice in my tomato juice before. So it recommends 2 tablespoons per quart. And I don't know that I'm going to do that this first time. I will probably do 1. I never have any trouble with my tomato juice. So I'm going to do 1 and do my sugar and my salt like normal and then go from there and see how that goes. So I have this little, it's a tiny little Pampered Chef measuring cup, I guess you could say. Okay, we're just going to do that many for now. I'm going to go ahead and put a tablespoon of sugar. I think that's what I usually do. Tablespoon of sugar in these. And then I've got some candy salt. I'm going to use candy salt. This would be a lot easier if it was in a container. just put some in here. So, same as the apple juice, I'm going to leave a 1/2 inch headspace, and I'm just going to fill it up. I already mixed this up. That way it's all kind of, none of the pulp is all the way in the bottom. I wonder why I'm looking on here. I actually have the headspace. It's actually marked on this, which kind of been handy. As long as it fits down on there. I have found that some jars it does not fit well on. I need more jars. Alright, so it's almost perfect. Let's see, how many did I do? 17. So actually I got more than applesauce by like 5. Actually 6 because, you know, that one busted. If you saw that, if you didn't see that applesauce video of where I put the first jar in and you hear a little clink, it's because the jar actually busted and spilled all in my water for the water bath canner. So now I get the rings. This is what I store the largemouth rings on, and I've been getting rid of some of my rings, giving them away, because some of them are just kind of, I don't know, looking bad. I get rid of, I've got some that are pretty new, and then some that are new that came with some of the lids, and so I don't really need all of these rings, and I figure somebody else could use them. Alright, let's get some of these better looking lids on these. And again, you just want to finger tighten these. So the water bath canner's hot. I'm going to go ahead and put these in here. I think I can do 2 batches. I can't remember how many I can fit in here. And hopefully none of these bust. Alright, so 7 in this batch. You leave a 1 to 2 inch layer of water on top, and then we're going to water bath can these for 40 minutes. After we pull them out of the canner, we let them cool off a little bit. About 12-24 hours later, go ahead and take the rings off, and then we get them put on shelves in the pantry. Here we have the pureed tomatoes, water bath canned, and we let them cool down. Let them set for a few hours, and then they're good to put on the shelves.